Hi, you're listening to a student-focused episode of the Sociology Show podcast. If you're studying the subject at GCSE, A-level, foundation, degree, or any other discipline, then this podcast could be of help to you. If you have a question for the show, then you can email the Sociology Show podcast at gmail.com, and one of the teachers, lecturers, examiners, or experts will answer your question for you. You can sponsor the show on the GoFundMe page and subscribe on all the usual podcast platforms. If you're going to class, going to the gym, or just chilling, put your headphones in and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to the Sociology Show. The Sociology Show podcast is brought to you in association with Tutor2U Sociology, the exam performance specialist for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. And so you can visit their website, which is tutor2u.net/sociology. And there you can pick up revision guides, flashcards, revision videos, and everything else that you need for your A-level or GCSE sociology studies. And so the focus of this episode is to look at studies and sociologists that you can use for the topic of religion and beliefs. And so to start with, I'm just going to talk through three of the interviews that I've done, three podcasts that you can have a listen to, and then I'm going to talk you through some studies that you could perhaps apply to your written work, your essays, and so on. And they're all studies, as usual, that have taken place in the last 21 years. In other words, since the turn of the millennium. Now, if you haven't yet already listened, if you are studying the family topic, the education topic, or the crime topic, I've also done some of these for those ones as well. So please do go back and have a listen to those if you haven't already. And another request, I mentioned this on a few others, but if you do listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, please could you give me a 5-star review and a nice comment? Okay, I am begging. Yes, I am begging. But basically, it helps me move up the charts. I think I'm the 4th most popular sociology podcast in the world at the moment, and I'd like to move up. If I can get to 3, 2, and then eventually 1, that would be absolutely fantastic. So if you can give me a nice score and a nice review, that would really be beneficial. Okay, so let's have a think about 3 of the interviews that I've done that you could go back and have a listen to then. So the first one was conducted in November 2020, and I interviewed Dr. Julia Martinez-Orino about the Roman Catholic Church. Now, Dr. Martinez-Orino's research is all about apostasy. Now, if you haven't heard that word before, it means to turn your back on or to move away or to break away from the faith that you're attached to. And her research looks at those who are trying to move away from the Catholic Church, particularly looking at those who are part of the Roman Catholic Church in South America. Now, what she describes is just how difficult that is. We know that the majority of people who have a faith follow the faith of their family, of their wider community, of their nationality. And so to actually move away from the faith or to admit that you don't believe in it or to turn your back on it can be hugely difficult. And in many cases, there's quite a protocol that you have to go through in order to just turn your back on it. You can't simply say that you don't want to be part of that faith anymore. You actually have to do a fair amount of housework, paperwork, in order to leave the faith itself. And so Dr. Martinez-Orino's research is all about apostasy from the Catholic Church. And it's a really fascinating, interesting piece of research because it makes you think about how easy or difficult it is for people to choose their faith. As I said, the majority of people are expected to follow a faith rather than choosing it. And what about those people that want to leave it, want to turn their back on it? How does that leave them in respect of their relationship with their friends and family? It's quite a difficult scenario for many individuals to have to go through. So that's a good one to listen to. As I said, that's from November 2020, Dr. Julia Martinez-Orino. The second podcast that you can have a listen to is only a very short one, and it's Professor Steve Bruce. Now, you probably have seen the name Bruce come up quite a lot. He is in the textbooks a lot, okay? Very important researcher from the University of Aberdeen. And Professor Steve Bruce mainly talks about secularisation. That's his big area. That's his big area of expertise. And so in this short interview, Professor Steve Bruce talks about the fact that secularisation is undoubtedly happening, particularly in the UK. And he talks about, if you have a look at a lot of the churches and what they are now being used for, that they've had to close down because the number of people visiting on a weekly basis is so small. And so please do have a listen to that one. Bruce is certainly a name you will have heard. He will have come up in your textbooks. Really important if you've got anything to do with secularization. So go back and listen to that one. Professor Steve Bruce, that is from August 2020. And then the third one I thought you could have a listen to is with the researcher Drew Dalton. And Drew Dalton is from the University of Sunderland, and his research focuses on LGBT Muslims. And I was lucky enough to interview him back in June 2020. This is a really interesting one because there is obviously a discussion as to whether being LGBT and being Muslim can work. Do they sit side by side? Are they opposed to each other? You know, it's a massive discussion, and Drew Dalton has done a huge amount of research on this, and he does also work with LGBT Muslims, which is a fascinating area of expertise. I'm sure you would agree. So do have a listen to that one. As I said, that's June 2020, and that's Drew Dalton from the University of Sunderland. And actually, I am looking to interview more people in the area of beliefs or religion. It's probably one of the areas that I don't quite have as much interviews with as I would like. So if there is someone that you would like me to interview working in the field of religion or beliefs, then please do send me an email at the Sociology Show podcast at gmail.com, and I will get in touch with them, see if they are free, see if they can do an interview. It's certainly a topic or area that I would like to do quite a lot more interviews on. Okay, so let's go into the study. So I'm going to talk you through 6 different studies that you could potentially, again, use in your research. And as I've mentioned at the start, all of the research that I talk you through is from the new millennium. So it's since 2000 onwards. And actually, the first piece of research I'm going to talk you through is from the year 2000. It's by the theorist Melton, and it's called The Church of Scientology. Now, I'm sure you've heard of Scientology, but Scientology is a really good example to use within your essays. And so this is a case study of one of the most controversial organizations in the world today. And Melton looks at Scientology from its small beginnings in what's called Dianetics and the work of its pioneer, L. Ron Hubbard, to the huge organization that is today. And this study is particularly useful to show how a group can grow through the stages of cult, sect, denomination, and church, and questions whether Scientology today has the necessary characteristics to now be classified as a major mainstream religion. Now, that question comes up quite a lot, doesn't it? What's the difference between a cult, a sect, a denomination, and a church? And Scientology is a really useful one to use for this argument because of the different stages that it's been through over a relatively short period of time in terms of how it started quite small to the big kind of organization that it is today. If you're interested in Scientology as well, there's a couple of other things to watch. There's a documentary called Going Clear, which many of you may have heard of. And Louis Theroux, the documentary maker as well, has done some interesting work on Scientology. So if you are interested in it, then there are lots of pieces of research to use. But I think Scientology is a really interesting area to look at because of that big change over a relatively short period of time that it's gone through. So that's your first piece of research that you could use in your essays. That's Melton, The Church of Scientology, and that is from the year 2000. The second piece of research that I think you could have a look at is by Hellman and Derulans, and their research is called How Secular is Europe, and that's from 2006. Now, we know that the question of secularization is one of the biggest and most popular questions that can come up across exam boards. Secularization, really key argument, really key discussion. And now this piece of research gathers data from the European Values Study surveys, and it uses this research to empirically test hypotheses concerning patterns of variation in religious beliefs and practices. The findings from Hellman and Derulans suggest that religious pluralism produces not higher levels, but actually lower levels of religiosity. And there is much more evidence for secularization than against it, as societies become more globalized. So actually their research shows that within Europe, many people suggest that religion's just changing and it's pluralized and people are looking for different areas of religion. But actually their findings show that actually secularization is very much a real thing across Europe and is definitely happening. In particular, the better ICT and internet connections there are in a country, then the less religious the people in that country become as they start to look elsewhere, perhaps look at scientific discoveries, perhaps look over their shoulder at neighbours that have become more secular. And so it's really interesting that as a country develops within Europe, then it does become more secular. So if you're looking for some evidence, some names to back up the secularization debate, there are many, but Hellman and Derulans is a good one to use, and that's called How Secular is Europe, and that is from 2006. Now, the next piece of research that I'm going to suggest is something if you're looking for a bit more of an overview about religion in the world today. And this is by Aldridge. The name of the study is Religion in the Contemporary World, a Sociological Introduction. This is from 2007. Now, in this research, Aldridge shows that religion is an essential part of all societies, even those that have become more secular in recent times. So this is actually a good counter-argument or criticism against the previous piece of research that I talked about. In particular, the research shows the difficulty of maintaining order in multicultural cities in which there can be a culture war between progressive secularists and conservative believers. Aldridge questions how a society can work when often there exist polar opposite views between those with no faith and those with fundamental faith. For example, something like sexuality. If we want to live in multicultural societies where some people are very, very pro-LGBT and some people believe it's not part of their culture, then can we sit side by side without any problems? Or is there always going to be some disruption? Is there always going to be some sort of angst between the two groups where we can't work completely together? And so Aldridge's research is really interesting because it shows that actually religion is an essential part of society, even if we believe we're moving away from it. So, for example, in the UK, we may consider ourselves to becoming more secular, but actually something like the Islamic faith is growing within the UK. So this is a fantastic piece of research. I'll give you the details again. That's Aldridge, Religion in the Contemporary World, a Sociological Introduction, and that's from 2007. So that's going to be the end of part one. In part two, we'll look at some more research and other theorists away from sociology who talk about the topic of beliefs and religion.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Hello and welcome back to part two of the Sociology Show. We are looking at sociological studies and sociologists that you can use for the topics of religion and beliefs. And so the next one I'm going to talk about is someone that I mentioned right at the start, someone that I did a short interview with, and that is Steve Bruce from the University of Aberdeen. And he wrote a study in 2008 called Fundamentalism. Nice to the point piece of research and title there, isn't it? Now, in this research, Bruce looks at the increase of fundamentalism following the events of 9/11 through organizations such as Al-Qaeda and the Christian right in the USA. Bruce questions why violence is often used by these groups and why fundamentalism is much more prominent in some faiths compared with others. Bruce also considers how fundamentalism often derives as a response to Western cultural imperialism and the fear of traditional beliefs being eroded away. And so if you're looking for something in terms of why and how fundamentalism occurs, then this is a really good piece of research to use. And it also kind of backs up the previous piece of research that I was talking about by Aldridge, questioning whether Western cultural beliefs and Western cultural imperialism or neoliberalism can sit side by side compared to some more traditional faiths and religion. And many people say that it can't. This is a problem, that we're trying to build multicultural societies and diverse cultures, but actually the fundamental beliefs of those people do not sit next to each other quite so well. So if you're looking for something on fundamentalism, remember questions on fundamentalism do come up quite often, then this is a good researcher to use. Steve Bruce, his book Fundamentalism, and that is from 2008. The next piece of research I'm going to suggest that you have a look into in more detail is by Collins Mayo and Dandelion, and this is called Religion and Youth from 2010. Now, this research is based on detailed surveys with youths in the UK, USA and Australia. And this research looks at the relationship young people have with religion and the battle that religions have in terms of keeping religion interesting and relevant to young people. We know that as each generation goes on in many of those societies, there's less interest in religion and the number of churchgoers, for example, starts to drop. Much of the research data suggests those who are attending church are in a much older age bracket. And so this study by Collins Mayo and Dandelion shows that faith or not having faith is a key aspect in constructing a personal identity. It also questions transmission and the passing on of faith from one generation to the next, and whether youths follow their parents' beliefs or they look for alternatives. It also questions that there is a popularity among some youths going back towards faith, going back towards Christianity, for example, in some parts of the USA. And so it's a really good piece of research if you're looking for something to do with beliefs and age. Okay, so if you're looking for something to do with beliefs and age, or youth groups, or the changing face of religion, or why religion is becoming less popular with different age groups, then this is a really, really good one to look at. So that's Collins, Mayo, and Dandelion, and that's Religion and Youth, and that piece of research is from 2010. And on to the next one then, and this is by Harris. The name of the study is Waking Up, Searching for Spirituality Without Religion. Now, we know that many of the questions and research looks at how there's been a transition away from mainstream religion to spirituality. A lot of people have made that transition, and a lot of people, if you ask them, are you religious? They may say, no, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. And so Harris's research is really good for this. Now, Sam Harris is a scientist, a philosopher, and an atheist. And you may have heard of him. He's very popular. He does lots of interviews. He's been interviewed by the likes of Joe Rogan, for example. He's written loads and loads of textbook, and he questions how, as humans, we can fill the void of religion in our lives as many societies become more secular. Harris argues that we can be spiritual without being religious, and he shows that a certain form of spirituality is actually integral to understanding the nature of the mind. Importantly, he notes that spirituality and an understanding of the mind can be both rational and scientific, whereas he suggests that faith sits outside such logic. So Sam Harris is a very well-known atheist, okay, very well-known atheist. You may have seen some of his clips on YouTube, some of his talks. He also does a regular podcast as well, and he argues that mainstream religion has no logic to it. There's no sense to it. It's things that can't be proved in any way, and it makes no rational sense to follow mainstream religion, but he argues that it does make sense to follow some forms of spirituality because it's psychological. If you're using spiritual practices to meditate, for example, to keep calm, to control your breathing, they are rational forms of behavior, which according to Sam Harris is very different to following a mainstream religion, which doesn't really have any kind of validity to it at all, according to him. So if you're looking for someone who is kind of more mainstream to use within your essays, then Sam Harris, good person to use. Waking Up, Searching for Spirituality Without Religion, and that is from 2015. Now, if Sam Harris is kind of the big name for atheism within the US, then the person that you can use if you are using a UK researcher then is the very famous Richard Dawkins. I'm sure you've heard of Richard Dawkins. Quite a controversial character sometimes. He's quite outspoken. He's quite critical of religion. And so Richard Dawkins has written numerous books. Probably the best known of his books is The God Delusion from 2006. Now, as an evolutionary theorist, Dawkins has long asserted that a belief in God is both irrational and profoundly harmful to society. His research uses a scientific angle to show how religions lack logic, and it's also responsible for a large amount of worldwide suffering. Now, in the book, Dawkins constructs a 7-point scale of religiosity from number 1, those who have 100% certainty in God, to number 7, those who have 100% certainty that there is not a God. And this is a really good starting point, actually. It's something that I use with my students when I'm first introducing the topic of beliefs. I put the 7-point scale up on the board and I ask people to point out where they think they are. Do they think themselves as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7? And what's really interesting, according to Dawkins, is he argues that no one can be a 1 and no one can be a 7. He himself, even as a very famous atheist, says that he's a 6 because he can't say with absolute 100% certainty that there isn't a God. Likewise, he argues that no one can 100% call themselves a 1. And this causes a really good, interesting debate within classrooms, particularly once you ask everyone within the class to put themselves somewhere on the scale of 1 to 7. Now, by the end of 2014, the book, The God Delusion, has sold more than 3 million copies worldwide. So it's huge, massive. And actually, if you're interested in Dawkins, there's lots of other books and texts that you can look at. And if you go onto YouTube and type Richard Dawkins in, you'll be able to see lots of his documentaries that he's made as well. So that's Richard Dawkins, The God Delusion, and that is from 2006. And then the last one, again, someone who's not necessarily a sociologist, but a book which is very famous and sold millions of copies. And this is Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now in 2001. As I said, this book sold millions worldwide and shows how many have moved away from traditional religion and into spirituality. Eckhart Tolle argues that areas of focus such as the source of chi, enlightened relationships, creative use of the mind, and considering the cycle of life can all help individuals with their mental health. The overriding theory of the book is that humans must try and enjoy the present as much as possible, rather than constantly either worrying about the past or being anxious about the future. Okay, and that's where the title The Power of Now came about from Eckhart Tolle. So it's kind of a self-help book, and it focuses much more on the psychology and the philosophy of using your mind. So whether it's considered spirituality more than religion is quite an interesting point, but it's a very big, well-selling book. Again, you can go into YouTube if you like, type in the name Eckhart Tolle and look for The Power of Now, and you can see some of the research that he's talked about. So let me give you that one again just to finish off. That is Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, and that is from 2001. So there we go. I hope you found some useful pieces of research in there for religion and beliefs. And as I said, I would like to interview more people on this topic. I find it really, really interesting. I'd like to speak to some more people around a diversity of different faiths. So if you've got any names or even some suggestions of people that you know that I could talk to, then please do get in touch. That is at the Sociology Show podcast@gmail.com. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening and best wishes. Take care.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for the Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the Sociology Show podcast@gmail.com.